The trade deal that Beijing could potentially exploit, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, was negotiated by the Trump administration and enacted in 2020. Its rules could let Chinese autos assembled in Mexico enter the United States, either duty-free or at a nominal 2.5% tariff rate. Either way, China could sell its EVs well below typical US prices. To defuse the threat, the US does have options. Customs officials could rule that Chinese EVs don't qualify for the low duty or duty-free benefits of being assembled in Mexico. US policymakers could also pressure Mexico to keep Chinese vehicles out of that country. Or they could bar Chinese EVs from the US because they would threaten America's national security. Before going on, remember? Don't forget to like the video. Subscribe to our channel for more interesting stuff like this. For his part, Donald Trump told Time magazine in April, "I will tariff them at 100% because I'm not going to allow them to steal the rest of our business." Whatever steps the US government might take, though, would likely face legal challenges from companies that want to import the Chinese EVs. The threat from Beijing is emerging just as US automakers face slowing EV sales, even while investing billions to produce them in a high-priced bet that Americans will embrace battery-powered autos in the coming decades. Comparatively high prices, despite federal tax incentives for buyers, have weakened EV sales in the United States. So has public anxiety about a scarcity of charging stations, potentially made worse by rising thefts of cables at charging stations. Optimists suggest that an influx of ultra-low-priced Chinese EVs could accelerate US electric vehicle purchases, speed up investment in charging stations, and force down prices. It would be cheaper just to let the Chinese cars come in, forget all the tariffs and subsidies. Let the market figure it out, said Christine McDaniel, a senior research fellow at George Mason University's Mercatus Center, who was a trade official in the George W. Bush administration. Yes, it would be disruptive, but EVs would get on the road in the US a lot faster. At stake is an enormously consequential question. Who stands to dominate the manufacture and sale of zero-emissions electric vehicles? In achieving technological breakthroughs while holding down costs, Chinese automakers have made remarkable strides. China's BYD last year introduced a small EV called the Seagull that sells for just $12,000 in China, $21,000, for a version sold in some Latin American countries. Considered a marvel of engineering efficiency, its lightweight design allows the Seagull to go farther per charge on a smaller battery. BYD has said it's considering building a factory in Mexico, but only for the Mexican market. US policymakers and auto companies are less than reassured. Just look at China. Look at how big their market share is in EVs. John Lawler, Ford Motors' chief financial officer, said at this month's Deutsche Bank Global Auto Industry Conference, "Those are significant competitive threats we need to deal with. They have a development process that is much faster, 24 months. By contrast, US vehicles have typically undergone development for 4 to 5 years, though that's been reduced to 3 years or less for EVs. Critics note that BYD and other Chinese EV makers have achieved their cost efficiencies thanks to heavy government subsidies. Beijing spent 953 billion Chinese renminbi, more than $130 billion at current exchange rates on EVs and other green vehicles from 2009 through 2021, according to researchers at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It's not competition, Biden asserted last month. It's cheating. Last month, Biden drastically raised the tariff on Chinese EVs from the 27.5% established under Trump to 102.5%. It's meant to price even the bargain-priced BYD Seagull out of the US market. Europeans are worried too. The European Union says it plans to impose tariffs of up to 38.1% on Chinese EVs for 4 months starting in July. The US-Mexico-Canada agreement, though, potentially lets vehicles assembled in Mexico, even if made by European or Asian automakers, enter the US at a much lower tariff or none at all. If made in Mexico, cars met the USMCA's requirements, they could enter the United States duty-free. At least 75% of a car and its parts would have to come from North America, and at least 40% of it must originate in places where workers earn at least $16 an hour. The US will be successful in excluding Mexican/Chinese EVs. The most effective and quickest way to keep out Chinese EVs, Gantz argues, would be to block them on national security grounds. Today's EVs, after all, are loaded with cameras, sensors, and other technological gizmos that can collect images from the auto's surroundings and sensitive personal information from drivers. And China isn't merely an economic competitor, it's a geopolitical adversary, and potentially a military one too. US fears regarding the possible use of connected vehicles to spy on military installations or power plants are not irrational, Gantz wrote. You could imagine a scenario where the US tells Mexico, "Don't even think about allowing this Chinese EV investment into Mexico," she said. "We will not allow those cars into the US." What's stopping the White House, McDaniel said, whether it's right now or the next administration, from just releasing a new document, an executive order, saying, "We will no longer recognize products from our USMCA partners if they have more than X% content from foreign entities of concern, including China." The US has additional leverage because the USMCA comes up for review in 2026. If it seeks to alter the agreement, perhaps adding a provision to ban or limit Chinese EVs from Mexico, but fails to prevail after negotiating with Canada and Mexico, it could let the USMCA expire. McDaniel noted that the World Trade Organization, which was established to enforce global trade rules, has become largely toothless. The WTO's appellate body, its Supreme Court, effectively stopped functioning in December 2019 because the US blocked the appointment of new judges to the panel. Trade cases now go unresolved indefinitely. "We're not in a WTO world anymore," McDaniel said. "It's might make right. That's the sort of world we're in." In conclusion, Chinese EVs are rapidly gaining a foothold in Mexico, creating a potential backdoor into the US market through the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. This presents both an economic and national security challenge for the US as it seeks to protect its domestic auto industry while managing geopolitical concerns with China. As Chinese automakers leverage Mexico for assembly, US policymakers must decide whether to impose stricter trade measures and national security blocks, or renegotiate trade agreements to prevent a flood of low-cost Chinese EVs into the US market. The outcome of this evolving situation could shape the future of the North American auto industry. Thanks for watching. Kindly subscribe to our channel for more.